Hello everybody and welcome back to Gardens and Crystals with me, Wesley Peterson, and today I want to do a care tip video for you all about my beautiful plant I have next to me here. This is my Ficus benjamina, and I want to tell you a little story about this plant before I get into the care tips because it's quite interesting. I went out shopping for plants as I do when I go out raiding the rack. And I found this plant, it must be now at least 3 years ago. 3 years ago. And well, I say I found this plant. I didn't find this plant like this. What I found was on a very kind of last hope rack. I found two plants in two small pots. So there are two separate pots that I put into this one container here. Well, this is the second time I've repotted this plant, actually. And it only had around about, between the two plants, 10 leaves. We can say about 10 leaves. They were near enough completely bare. And, well, they were selling each little pot for 10 Swedish krona. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to take those two small pots for 20 Swedish krona and see if I can bring this beautiful plant back to life. Now, we all know that Ficus benjaminas are not the easiest plant to keep foliage on if you don't do things quite right. They're very sensitive to changes in their environment, so we must remember that. So that is one important thing to remember right off the bat. These plants are sensitive to their environment. So anyway, I got these plants and I decided to pot them in the previous pot all together in a pot with soil. And actually the soil, I didn't do anything at that time. I didn't really know what I should do. So I just put it in a gardening mix and I did nothing to amend the soil. But since then I've learned I need to do a lot of things to amend the soil if I want the soil to be much better for the plant. But that actually didn't affect this plant. It was very happy. Put it in a pot, and during the summer it started flushing out a lot of smaller leaves on some of the side branches of the main stems, and then it started growing more and more. And then the next summer it grew out more and more, and it started flushing out lots and lots of leaves. And now 3 years on, I have this bush of a plant next to me, and this plant would be much bigger than this. Each year, I've had to go in and prune it back about 30 centimeters to keep this shape so that I could have it on the sideboard. If I wanted this to be a floor plant, I could easily go ahead and let this plant carry on growing up and it would grow into a tree for me. But I've wanted to keep the shape, and this shows you that it's very easy to go in and prune the plant and to keep a nice maintained shape if that's what you want to do. So this is the result of that. Two little pots with two stems in each pot and only a few leaves. I've got a jungle of a plant and it is very happy. This plant has actually gone against all the general rules of how to look after a Ficus benjamina. So I want to tell you about those to show you that, well, even though it is supposed to be a very fussy plant, if it's happy where it is, it will actually do okay. I've had this plant in a semi-shady area. Now, one of the most important things that you will see written about a Ficus benjamina is that it needs to have an extreme amount of bright, indirect light to keep it happy and to stop the foliage falling off the plant. But I've had this plant in a semi-shady area in my home and when it was in my apartment, and it still flushed out leaves. So the light that was coming through must have been enough to keep the plant happy and stimulate it. I had it, after I moved it here to our crystal cottage, in the middle of our home, and it's quite shady there. I mean, during the day in the summertime, some of the light does shine through the south-facing windows and maybe penetrate the plant slightly for a small amount of time during the day, but otherwise the light that's ricocheting around the room must be enough to keep you happy because it's been flushing out and I've had to go in and prune it back many times. So it's been in a semi-shady position, but as I said, the general rule is to keep this plant in a bright indirect position and then it will just grow like mad for you. during the summer season. During the winter season, it does go kind of dormant. It doesn't grow very much, and you can experience the foliage falling off in certain areas, but that isn't something to worry about with this plant generally. Now, I'm saying generally, if you think about a deciduous tree outside, it loses all its leaves and they grow back. Now, this plant doesn't do that at that extreme, but every winter it will shed out some of its leaves to flush out new leaves on the new stems in the summer season. So do expect leaf drop on this plant. It will get leaf drop as soon as it starts getting too dark. So if it's shady in your house and then it's starting to get darker outside because of the shorter day lengths, then the plant is going to lose a lot of its foliage, but it will come back. Because, I mean, seriously, if I bought this plant with next to nothing on it and I could get it to bounce back to this, it shows that it's not all over if the leaves do fall off. So while we're talking about leaf drop on this plant being a huge issue, we might as well go into it. Okay, we've said the first thing is that if it's in a very low light situation, the plant will lose its leaves. It needs to have light to sustain everything that's going on in the plant. If you underwater the plant, it is most definitely going to drop all its leaves. It has very thin leaves and they need to be kept plump with moisture, so it will lose its leaves because of that. But conversely, if you overwater this plant, it will also start to lose leaves because they're going to start getting black or yellow and patches, and they will fall off because the plant is stressed. So basically, you need to keep a good balance with the watering and in comparison to the amount of light that the plant is getting. So watering, this plant likes to stay slightly moist for the most part. You can allow the first 2-3 inches of the soil to dry out and then get a water gauge, your finger, or however you go in and test if the soil is moist. Then if 3 inches are dry, you can go in and water your plant. The plant doesn't like to be overwatered, that's for sure. It will rot out in the roots if it's overwatered, but conversely, if it's underwatered and the whole soil is dry, it's just going to drop all its leaves. It will not be happy. So it is a balancing act. I have had periods where this plant has been left and hasn't been watered for a while and it survived. And I've had periods where I've watered it a lot and it survived. I just think that you just need to make sure that it's not excessive amounts of time with or without water. There must be a slight drying out and then a re-watering, but not over the top. So with that in mind, I do actually have my Ficus benjamina in this ceramic pot without a hole in the bottom. And that is a no most of the time with plants. But again, I planted this plant way back when I really didn't have as much knowledge as I have now about plants. And I put this plant in a pot without drainage holes the first time. And then I put it in this slightly larger pot without drainage holes the second time. And I did that because I know that the plant likes to stay moist. So this hasn't affected this plant at all. So this is another one of those things that no, don't ever do that. There must be drainage holes. All of the excess minerals and things that are in the soil need to be able to drain out and flush out and so forth and this and that. That is very true. But this plant has been fine in this pot. But I've been thinking this spring, I'm not sure. I might want to repot this plant. And if I repot it, and when I repot it, I will most definitely put it in a pot with drainage holes in the bottom so that I can control the watering. But I've just been watering and leaving this plant and watering and leaving this plant for 3 years without drainage holes, and my plant is looking gorgeous. So don't over-analyze these kind of situations. Don't stress out about it. If you have a plant in a pot with no drainage holes, you just need to think an extra amount about how much you're watering and about what's happening to the soil, because yes, minerals and substances and salt and so forth can build up in the soil and eventually that will start to harm your plant. But 3 years, my plant's been fine. So it is around about now. I need to go in and give it another repot. And I think, well, this plant will start taking off again soon. So I need to do it now if I'm going to do it. Now, this is beginning of April. So I need to go in and do it now. Otherwise, I won't want to disturb it in the middle of the summer when it's starting to flush out and look beautiful again. And I'm thinking I might let it grow another 10 centimeters and trim it around there, because I know this is going to grow much more than that. But I don't want it getting all these long, thin branches on it. No, I don't want the plant growing all the way up to the ceiling. I really like the look of this like this. It looks like a little cascading, beautiful, happy bundle of Ficus benjamina. I'm very happy about that. When it comes to fertilizing, you should fertilize this plant regularly in the growing season. Again, because it likes to be moist but not over wet, saturated. When it's growing, it does grow vigorously. It grows a lot, and that is kind of the general rule for most ficus plants, most fig plants. So it does need a boost of fertilizer in the summer season. You can do that every month, and it will really appreciate that. I haven't actually fertilized this plant that much. I have gone in with a liquid organic fertilizer in the summer seasons and fertilized it. And I think that's given it the boost. But all winter long and so forth, I don't really ever give this plant any fertilizer. And it's doing very well with that. So, humidity. This plant is a humidity loving plant. That doesn't mean that you actually have to go in and keep it next to a humidifier and be spraying it over all the time and so forth. If you have the time and you don't have many plants, you can go and spray this plant often and it will really enjoy it. And you'll also keep the leaves clean and clear at the same time. House plants, they get very dusty all the time. We all know that. You can't help it. They're not in a natural environment where it's rainy and windy and all sorts of other things. So all you need to think about is that this plant does survive fine in a normal house humidity. So that would say nothing below 30% humidity. But of course, it would prefer around 50%, 50-60%. This plant will be very happy with that. So not lower than 30%, and most homes aren't. So you don't have to worry about that, and especially during the winter time when you've got heating on and all sorts of things. So yeah, normal house humidity and this plant is fine. But if you have somewhere where you have some humidifier and you have it with other plants and it's getting bright and direct light, then it's going to just love that situation. This plant can get pests just like any other plant, and especially if it is stressed out in any way. If it's stressed out, you could see such things as yellowing or black spots on the leaves, marks, and you could get some kind of sappy kind of stuff dripping off the leaves. That could be a sign that you have insects. So this plant can get anything from mealybugs, spider mites, thrips, everything. Mine has been so lucky in all these years. I haven't actually seen this plant with a pest problem. And that is because this is one of those plants that I've just had. And that is just because I've had this plant standing in areas on its own. Not because of any special reason. It's just that I've liked it as a statement piece on its own, and it's been on its own. So it hasn't been infected by being grouped together with a lot of other plants. And I found that my plants that are grouped together, like in my indoor terrace garden in my apartment, the insects run rampant and they spread and spread and spread. So even though these displays of lots of beautiful houseplants together look wonderful, and they are, I can't help myself either, that is not an optimal situation for your houseplants. You cannot control the insects that easily. You will be reducing them, but they will keep coming back. But if you have a standalone plant, it's much easier to keep that plant fresh and healthy, and it won't be attacked from any insects that are on another plant that spread. So this plant, for me, has had no insects in all those years, and I'm so pleased about that. Now, when it comes to soil, as I said in the beginning, I just put this in a garden soil mix. And it's been doing very well, and it's been fertilized, and it's been fine in a pot with no holes. But what you should do is that you should get a gardening mix it with some sand, mix it with some bark, mix it with biochar, and you could put lecker balls in and so forth to keep the soil just loose and aerating. And this is basically the same for most plants. they need an aerating soil. But you don't need to go in and put things like perlite in there or vermiculite, because this is a plant that doesn't need to dry out very quickly. It likes to stay moist, but at a nice level. So the idea of putting bark and so forth in there is to keep it aerated and also to give it nutrients at the same time. But other than that, I think this plant is still just in gardening mix in a pot with no hole, and you see the result. Again, don't overthink it sometimes. Use what you have and experiment. Not everybody has access to all of these different things, and not everybody has the funds for all these different things. You don't have to fuss too much about it with some plants. I would just say, if you are investing in a plant that you have bought where there are lots of that plant available, you can buy the plant and you can use the soil you have and experiment. See if it works for you. See if you can find the balance that way. But if you want to up the grade, if you want to give your plant a much better quality soil, then you can go and do all these other things. But my plant has shown me that just basic gardening soil, watering when it's near enough dried out, has kept it happy. Fussy plant? They're all saying that you're fussy. Everyone out there is saying Ficus benjamina, I'll never have me one of those because they drop their leaves so easily. But this one, since I've had it, has never dropped all its leaves. As I said, it just does the normal leaf dropping, which is very normal for the plant. I will come if I haven't been here for a week or two, and I can see all the leaves lying around the bottom, but the plant is still thick and it's okay. When it comes to propagating this plant, it's very easy to propagate. You can do stem propagations and put them in water, or you can put them in soil. You can do air layering on the stem, scratch a bit of the surface of the stem, put a bag around it, a plastic bag, a bottle or whatever, and it will flush out roots. It's just very easy like that. Water or soil, air layering, however you want to do it, it's easy to propagate this plant. I've also heard that this plant is very good at cleaning the air and getting rid of formaldehyde and saline. But remember this about cleaning the air, you would need to have basically something like the Amazon rainforest for it to be making a huge difference in your home. So we can class this as a nice thing to think about, but it's not really something that's doing a huge amount for your home if you just have a couple of plants, but they do clean the air. So yeah, so that's just basically a nice to know thing. So when it comes to temperature for this plant, it can take a broad range of temperatures. It doesn't like extreme changes from warm to cold, cold to warm. And this plant definitely does not like to be sitting in a cold draft or anywhere where it's getting cold from the windows or something like that. It can't take frost. It can't take any temperature below 16 degrees Celsius in your home. And that is the temperature I set the thermometer to in our cottage when we're not here. We put the air conditioner on and it maintains the temperature of the air in our cottage at 16 degrees Celsius during the winter when we're not here, even if it's minus 15 degrees outside. This plant has survived through that. Now, basically, it's suggested that the plant should never be below around 18, 19 degrees Celsius, but I've seen this plant weather it out at 16 degrees Celsius for long periods in my home, and look at it, it's fine. So, on the safe side, between 18 and at a max 30, 35 degrees in your home, but some places it gets really warm. This plant is not going to suffer from the heat upwards as long as it's getting the moisture it needs, but it definitely can't drop lower than the 16 degrees Celsius if you don't want it to just drop all its leaves and die off. So I think I've basically covered a lot of the general ideas of how to look after this plant. And I would not say to any of you that this is a plant that's difficult to keep. The green one, the green variety like this, it's okay, but it doesn't like to be moved around from completely different environments because then it will drop all its leaves. That is just a basic thing that happens with these plants. Now, I bought a bigger one of these. I thought, oh, I've got it down with the Ficus benjaminas. So I bought myself a lovely, big, variegated variety, the Variegated variety. And it was beautiful for a month or so. And then all of a sudden, dropped every single leaf and died. It didn't come back to life. That is very common with these plants. When you go and buy them from a garden centre and they've loved the environment they've been in, especially if it's some kind of warm, humid greenhouse, and then you bring it into your home, even if you think you're giving it bright and direct light, that light isn't as bright as probably where it was or whatever, and it's definitely not the same humidity, and it's definitely not, you know, the same feeling for the plant, it is going to drop everything. But I would say, if that happens, think about, how is my plant situated? What's going on? What does it need? Look online. Look for different ideas of how you can revitalize the plant. Because usually they go for a shock period and you just have to have patience. If you keep the plant warm enough, you give it enough light and keep like watering it as you would as if it had all its leaves. Just keep doing the same things as if the plant is happy. Give it some time and your plant could surprise you and just flush back out the next season or a little later on when it's readjusted. A lot of plants need time to readjust, and many people think, especially if you're new to plants, people that are more used to what happens with plants will understand that this could happen. But if you're new to a plant and you see all its leaves fall off, you're just going to think, okay, that died, I'm no good at this, throw it in the bin. No, always give it some time, have some patience, stand back, love your plant, love it back to life, and you will get this. It will happen if the plant is not damaged, if it's not got root rot, if it's not completely dried out and its roots are crisp to a bone and they just can't rejuvenate themselves to be able to support the whole system of the plant. If it hasn't got too cold, you know, if it's not covered in pests, then you should be able to get your plant back. Yeah. I just wanted to do a video about this because I am so pleased with this plant. I'm so happy with it. I have moved it from my apartment to my cottage, as I said, and this plant didn't lose its leaves, didn't lose anything. I repotted it, didn't lose its leaves. I've actually pruned it. Yeah, I've only pruned it in the summer. So it's really been robust for me, this plant. But I would say the variegated varieties are much more difficult, and they do not like to be moved around too much because they just drop all their leaves. Now, I have a smaller one, and unfortunately I don't have it with me here at my cottage. I have it at my apartment, and that one is doing very well. But I want to do a separate video about that plant at some point, so I will do that because I'm experiencing interesting things with that plant. It hasn't lost all its leaves, it's growing, and it's doing fine for me. I've put it in different rooms and so forth as well. But one thing about that plant is, I will say that in this video, is if it's in a lower light condition, it will revert back to green. You will get a two-toned green plant instead of a white and green plant. And that's what's been happening with mine. So at some point I'm going to go and do a video about that and show you the effects of this plant. So it's not a stable plant in the variegated varieties. As far as I know, there could be new ones on the market that are. But if they're not getting enough light, they will revert because they need to produce more chlorophyll to survive. So before I close off this video, I just want to bring this plant in a little bit closer so you can see everything. I have some lovely crystals that I found round and about, quartz crystals that I've got in the bottom of this pot, and they seem to be keeping this plant as happy as anything else. So let's have a little closer look here. Look. So look at this jungle. Isn't it lovely? I'm so happy with this. And I hope now me shaking it around and moving it around to make this video is not going to make my plant all of a sudden lose all its leaves after this. That would be a nightmare. But I don't think that's going to happen. Not after all these years. And yeah, it would have been probably twice as tall as this if I allowed it. But I do keep it cut back. It's gorgeous. It's a bit dusty, but it's otherwise very happy. So if there are any care tips that I might have missed out, please write them down below so you can share them with me and other people. Otherwise, don't be afraid to go out there and get yourself a Ficus benjamina. You can find very small examples and you can test and see how that goes before you go out and buy yourself a bigger and much more expensive plant, because the bigger plants are quite expensive. You could be paying 400 to 1,000 Swedish krona for a plant that is like 1.5 meters tall, but then you'll bring it home and it will drop all its leaves and it won't be happy if you haven't got the exact right ingredients to keep it happy. Fussy, yes, but not impossible. So, all I have to say now is thank you very much once again for watching Gardens and Crystals with me, Wesley Peterson. Please remember to like, subscribe and hit the bell so you know when my next video will be coming up. And I will see you again very, very soon. Goodbye.